In our local newspaper about a week ago, there was a story about a new piece of art that went up in our town. And they interviewed the artist because the message was very timely. And she made an ironic comment in which she said, "I haven't watched the news and followed the news in 2 years." And here she was giving an interview with the newspaper. And it's a very sort of weird comment that I've heard different people say. I haven't watched the news. I don't watch the news. And sure, we might need to take a little break from the news for a couple days to kind of give our mind a mental break. But there can also be a danger in not paying any attention to the news. Maybe it's, well, if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't really matter. Or I'm not quite sure what's behind it. If it's, I don't want this thing to change the way I think or the way I feel, or it gets me worked up. But that's precisely what the news should do. It should change our minds, it should change our hearts, it should challenge us continually to grow. If we don't pay attention to the news, we don't know what's happening with Catholics throughout the world. We might miss things like the fact that there's a very prominent Catholic on trial right now in Hong Kong by the Chinese government because he owns the last newspaper that speaks out against what China and communism, and who's on trial right now because he went to a prayer service. And he's the last person who owns a newspaper, the only newspaper that speaks out against China. Or we might miss how Catholic schools in Hong Kong have been taught that they can't teach anything that is contrary to pro-China, and even things about our own Catholic faith. Or we might have missed the stories about how Haitians and Haitian Catholics are going on strike to protest that their president is not leaving from power and is holding on to power. So Catholics all throughout the country are going on strike in these days to draw international attention, putting their own lives at risk of being kidnapped by gangs. Or we might miss that the U.S. bishops have spoken out against the Equality Act. Or we might have missed that there was a move in our own state of Iowa to reinstate the death penalty. And thanks to some movement from the Iowa Catholic Conference and the bishops, that has sort of fizzled away. We might find ourselves like the Jews in our gospel today who say, well, we've heard about you, but why do you do this miracle for us? They don't allow their hearts and their minds to be changed by who Christ is. They've heard the news, they know who he is, but they haven't allowed it to change their minds and their hearts. And we especially as Catholic Christians, we hear that name Christian in our first reading today when the disciples are first called Christians in Antioch, meaning that we're followers of Christ, but also Catholic meaning that universal dimension of our faith, that we are Catholic Christians. We are people who are aware of what's going on in the world around us, who are aware of the sufferings that our brothers and sisters face. Because if we're ignorant of the sufferings of our brothers and sisters in Christ, we're ignorant of the sufferings of Christ in the world today. So the challenge, I think, as we are filled with a world that seems to have bad news or false news, fake news, to never forget the fact that we have the good news.